know Phil Hartman is Ronald Reagan, though. I don't care. Nobody can top that. Actually, he was better as Bill Clinton. Actually,
Dana Carvey was really.
Dana Carvey's king of impressions.
Yeah, but I think Phil Hartman's Bill Clinton was.
What about
the funniest?
the Will Ferrell Bush?
Will Ferrell Bush
is really good.
It's funny.
I wouldn't say Will Ferrell's is the most accurate.
Well, it has two thumbs and started asses.
Welcome to the Georgia Politics Podcast. It is Friday, April 12th. This is our first episode after the close of the Georgia legislative session. We took last week off. Thank you for that. I needed a little bit of break, not just from you, lovely listeners, but from the world in general. So, of course, I left my politics to go visit Washington, D.C., which was great. So
timely.
I know. So we are joined today with two guests in house. Let's start to my left. We have.
This is Craig Kidd, first vice chairman of the Fulton County Republican Party and chief of staff to the mayor of Johns Creek.
And my name is Ben Burnett. I will be replacing Jim Nance from the 18th green at Augusta.
Which you have the same tone of voice right now.
I sit on the city council in Alpharetta. I have opinions about things I know nothing about.
As do all of us.
Thank you.
Good. I think this is a fairly human trait.
Yeah, this is America. That's what we do here.
Especially in politics. Good Lord.
Thank you for having me.
Sure. Okay, so let's jump into just a little bit on crossover day.
I thought we were sticking with the Saturday Night Live thing.
Oh, no.
Oh, darn.
Yeah, we're all going to do our presidential impressions. No, we're going to... Yeah, you're welcome for having us avoid that. We did a deep hour and 20 minutes on crossover day last time, but now coming on the back end of it, we know what didn't make it through and what's going to be pushed to next year. So with each of these, let's maybe just go through and talk about what the energy might look like going into next session, if we'll ever see it again or if it's kind of done. And I think that's really relevant for our first topic, which is this big transportation package. The House passed a package that included the jet fuel tax break for Delta that's been standard since 2002, maybe 2004, something like that. A state takeover of the airport. Well, the House package passed an oversight committee of the airport that didn't go as far as the Senate version, and some rural transit expansion credits and other benefits to help with rural transit. It didn't get through. The House chairman on transportation, Kevin Tanner, was absent for a long time, working with other legislators to try and get this thing through. Midnight came and it didn't happen. Is there still going to be energy for something like this at the start of 2020?
Well, there's always energy for transportation issues. I mean, that ain't going away, obviously.
Well, the airport takeover is really what I'm wondering about.
Well, I think the thing I took biggest away from was the quote in the AJC from Governor Kemp when he mentioned that people are lucky sometimes when things don't pass or don't happen.
It's pretty telling.
Which definitely shows that Kemp's traction to the bill is a little lower than Senator Jones would have liked. But I don't think the issue has gone away. It might be muted a little bit next year. It's really too early to say.
Sure. Well,
the environment is just, we just don't know what the heck the environment is going to be.
But I ask because you had senators pitching the bill by holding up today's newspaper or at that time's newspaper that said so-and-so indicted. Next January will be a year, maybe a little bit less, removed from the apex of this drama with the local attorney general.
Don't make that. That's a big presumption right there. We may be nowhere near the apex of this. We may have 3 or 4 more indictments by next January. We just don't know.
In which case, I would expect it to still probably stay in hearts and minds of everybody.
I mean, look, if all things are equal, I sit on the city council, so and Craig works very closely with his mayor and his council in Johns Creek. Local control is everything to us. And although my politics don't philosophically align very much with the city of Atlanta's, I do value that the airport, in some context, belongs to them. Is there a cloud of suspicion around a lot of things that have gone on for a long time with the city of Atlanta? Yes. Is there a cloud of suspicion that has gone on for a long time with respect to the city of Atlanta and the airport? Also, yes. That being said, you can always take the opportunity to get right. And who's to say that the state of Georgia isn't going to ruin that too? And as far as the jet fuel tax, I'm somebody that doesn't live on an airplane like I used to, but I've had certain points where I sat on one a lot. There's a tremendous value in being anywhere in this country and being one flight from home. And regardless of how you feel about whether that's crony capitalism or not, that fact remains. And you pay for that one way or the other. Am I going to pay for it because my ticket is $8 more expensive and you always risk Delta potentially outsourcing flights to somewhere else? Does that make my life worse? Yeah, that would make my life worse. Does that mean that it's not a fair conversation to have every couple of years? Yes, but there's no question that the value of Coca-Cola, the value of Delta, the value of UPS to this economy is absolute.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make me liberal?
Only a socialist, but that's okay. But no, it's well put, and it brings me back to on the airport takeover side of it. I thought the compromise that was in the package that passed the House made sense to me. You know, I have a hunch, and I think I've said this on a past episode. I'm not sure the House would have taken up an airport takeover, quote unquote, at all if the Senate hadn't pushed it so hard. So I think the compromise they went to is let's create a board, a committee, a commission, whatever it is that oversees things that are happening within the airport. So like if a contractor is suspicion of bribery or something like that, you can bring him in. You don't necessarily have subpoena power, but it gives you some sort of play in the game. And I was like, okay, that's
you can make his life hard,
right?
For sure.
Yeah.
Sure.
I spoke glowingly of the compromise a couple weeks ago, and I am genuinely surprised that it didn't pass. Even if it was able, I'm surprised they weren't even able to put on another bill at 1150.
Sure.
Some form of it getting on there. And again, unfortunately, unless you get Burt Jones in here, and unless you get Kevin Tanner in here, and maybe Jeff Duncan, we'll never know exactly where that compromise failed. I mean, Burt Jones might have crossed his arms and said, "No, I'm not voting for anything short of my." We just don't know.
Mm-hmm. Well,
when they write their autobiography in a decade or two, then we'll
that no one reads.
That no one reads. No, I don't know. I don't think I would read a state senator's autobiography. That'd be pretty boring.
Might buy it and then it'll sit on the shelf.
Yeah, I'll wait till it's in the dollar bin. Won't be books by then, but yeah.
Well, the last time the jet fuel tax break didn't go through, Governor Deal at the time temporarily put it through on an executive order with the hopes that this session that we just left would make it more, not permanent, but give it a nice sunset date of 15 years, something like that. Is that something we think Brian Kemp is of the same philosophy towards?
There's no evidence that he isn't, so I would suspect that he would. The precedent has been set. The precedent was set by a very popular governor. Lawyers love precedents. So I would imagine he will do it.
And like you mentioned at the top of this topic, he doesn't seem to be a huge fan of parts of the transportation package anyways. So it wouldn't be, it's not out of the realm of possibility for him to go against members of, his party in the Senate that are pushing for something.
And I'm a very big fan of what Delta does and the extra mile they go to for the state in general. And there's no question. So if you're listening, governmental affairs Delta person, and you want to dole out some money to an Alpharetta City Council member, the max is $2,700.
That would be a member of the David Ralston family, I think, works for the Delta lobbying.
No,
team.
he does.
I regress, but I think there's value there. And even if it was standalone that you had to remove, I feel like Delta's support is largely bipartisan.
I think it would be. I would think it would take a very brave person to get up there in the well and just rant against Delta like a national Democrat would rant against a big company, Walmart, for example.
Amazon.
I mean, the AOC and Amazon. It would take a lot of guts for one of the, I would say, Democrats, but it could be Gertler.
It could be somebody who doesn't favor giving,
giving
$40 million to the C-suite.
And there's lots of those on the Republican side in this state. But it would be pretty gutsy.
I mean, the jet fuel tax break as a standalone, sometime around the middle of the session, passed the House with like 15 no votes, something like that, largely bipartisan, just for the fuel tax break part. So I do think there is wide bipartisan support here. I think it will probably get put in by Kemp in a temporary way until we come back and try again. Yeah. So switching from something Kemp maybe buffed up against to something he had a huge hand in, medicinal THC oil. Now, this is a little complicated. But essentially, people in Georgia before this legislative session could have used legally certain types of THC oil. They just couldn't buy it.
Drives me insane.
Me too. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense. It's something that the legislature this session had as a priority to get done. We were nearing the deadline, and Governor Kemp himself got involved and put people in the right places and said, get this done. And it was the second to last vote. We took it with about 30 seconds left to go before that clock hit midnight. So, credit where credit is due. He got that done. It is in a pretty limited scope, and that was the way I think they got a lot of conservative legislators to jump on. But there now will at least be options for patients who could have used THC oil to actually buy it in Georgia and not have to drive to, I guess maybe Florida would be the closest state, or Tennessee, to buy it and then come back, which, keeping that money in Georgia for the first office seems like a pretty good idea to me.
I don't disagree with anything you said. When you can buy something that doesn't carry the stigma that it did 10 years ago, and you get to allow a business owner here to help be a part of that transaction, no brainer. I think it's a good thing to be open for business. I also understand why people oppose that whole line of thinking in general. I just don't subscribe to it as well.
Sure. Well, and this does not open the floodgates for, nobody's going to be opening a complete medicinal shop tomorrow and selling smoking paraphernalia and smoking marijuana. It opens the door legislatively, maybe to get us a little closer to that.
I believe
but
it's a gateway.
Sure. But the law that passed is pretty tight on what this is, and what this can be used for, and who can grow it. It's not just Uncle Joe.
It's why the marijuana issue to me has never really been one that I've really followed or really attuned myself to. I don't know why. I just never has. But I guess I feel a little bit more secure about it passing because of what you just said, that the law is tight, and I know it would be because I know that it's a conservative body that passed it. Mm-hmm. It wasn't the Wisconsin House of Representatives that passed it, for example. So it comforts me a little bit. I take a step back on this picture and on this issue and look at the big picture and just sort of marvel of how much more libertarian the Republican Party has gotten in the last 10 years, and in society in general. In fact, I was talking to a constituent today, and we started talking about legalizing prostitution. And I mentioned that. I said, well, marijuana, this is showing how more libertarian we're getting as a country. I could easily see that becoming a conversation. So I think that perspective on, if it's not hurting anybody else, it's really growing in our society.
Marijuana really is a gateway drug to all sorts of
prostitution, apparently.
Yeah.
We got another casinos too. We could be talking about that same thing.
My philosophy on it, as a person who before the session didn't know a lot on the issue, is that it seems like in 2015, when we passed the law that said people could use it, it seemed like that was the hard part. And then this year was just finish the job, like let them buy it now.
Rolling Stone, get that first push out of the way.
Sure.
And the advocates from a legislative perspective were brilliant. They made it into a child health issue. They rolled out the kids, put them in front of the respective committees and basically said, this 10-year-old has been in pain for 4 years, and you have the power to stop this kid's pain.
The marketing machine.
Oh my God! I mean, that's brilliance, not conniving, devilish, whatever word you want to pick.
Well, it's also true.
So,
at least in some sense, even anecdotally.
I'm not saying it's not true.
Right.
Just as a strategy, it was very intelligent.
Sure.
I always appreciate when people play to win.
Oh, sure. Sure. Okay. Let's do some lightning round here.
Uh-oh.
A quick sense of how likely something is to come up again next year, where it stands right now. Casinos and gambling. A big issue kind of for the North Fulton area, a passion project for Senator Brandon Beach, who's running for Congress this upcoming election. Is this still going to be at the forefront next year?
The AJC will write a story about it, but I don't see it moving.
You don't think enough minds have changed?
No.
At some point, I have to think about how to say this, which means it's going to be good. At some point, my good friend who I support, Senator Beach, has got to decide when he wants to run for Congress and quit championing ideas that are lightning rods that will not get him through a primary. And this is one of them.
But this is a big business booster. I mean, I know there's people fight it for moral and ethical questions, sure, but this is a huge business booster.
I don't think he struggles for the support of businesses. I think he struggles with support of mommy and daddy and two kids and grandpa.
Yeah, because the economic development issue just hasn't been sold yet. There was a study last year that they did that basically said it's not going to create more money for the area. It just transfers the money that people have already spent for entertainment from the movie theater to the casino.
To somewhere else.
So I'm sure there's a cool economic term for that. It's just a money transfer, not a money growth. So they haven't really made the argument yet, and the contrary argument can be made very easily. I was having breakfast with a member of one of the local boards of educations yesterday, and I don't know why we started talking about casinos, but we did. And the argument was, crime, not really growing the economy for anybody. Can you point out a city to me that has had
regressive
growth?
Tax on the poor?
Yeah, growth. From casinos, regressive tax. You go into a casino, and most likely it's the people who shouldn't be in a casino are in there. I mean, I have a terrible story about a casino. I worked for a company years ago where we had a retreat to Tunica, Mississippi, which is right outside of Memphis. It's in the middle, nowhere northwest Mississippi.
I've been.
Me too.
There's nothing there. And I'm not a big gambler, so I'm not gambling. I'm walking around. It's the middle of the week, and the people who are in there just don't look like they should be throwing quarters down. And we went to dinner at one of the nice restaurants at the casino, and it was February, I think. And I said to the waitress, I said, "You guys don't really look that busy yet." She goes, "Well, the people haven't gotten their tax return refunds yet. Once they do, this place will be hopping." And I said, "Oh my God! I mean, that is just not the story you want to hear about who's going to a casino."
But a lot of this conversation centers around horse racing, though, which is,
I mean, that to me, that's two separate issues.
Well, yeah, but it is separate in some sense from the challenges you're talking about, and it has a larger economic impact than some of the cases you're talking about, where a casino might benefit the community. A established horse racing could establish an industry that spreads to the rural communities too. So I think that might be an easier selling point.
I don't know. I don't think that they have made the argument yet that the casinos benefit the lower economic classes with good jobs. I mean, I just don't think they've made that argument yet.
I wholly agree with Craig. In fact, when I spent years of my life living in Birmingham, Alabama, where they had a dog track, which is not the same thing, but it's a similar premise.
Sure.
And it was a bunch of people. When you walked in there, they were either private school kids looking to drink cheap beer and people that probably didn't have the money to spend. And it's defunct and has moved on. But I don't know that you can have one without the other. Does a horse track in Georgia that has no gambling survive?
Oh, certainly not.
Probably not.
No way. No, I take your point. Sure. Okay.
I think if maybe with a big M, maybe if we put it on I-95 somewhere outside Savannah, where you have that I-95 tourism traffic with Charleston and Savannah and all that, maybe then you could make an economic argument. It would have to be and put it in place maybe down in Liberty County or Long County where there's just not a lot of people who live there. So there wouldn't be as much of an impact on the local in a negative way. Maybe that could be made. I don't know about being in Atlanta.
Yeah, I think that's a good summary. Okay, next. Hate crimes legislation. The most notable part of this legislation for me when it passed through the House is it is the first piece of Georgia legislation that recognizes the LGBT class as a protected community. That's, in my mind, LGBTQ class as a protected community.
Thank you for that cue, Craig.
I'm just saying, if you're going to have the acronym, you might as well use it all.
It's actually LGBTQA+.
Oh.
Yeah, as I learned. But LGBTQA+ community as a protected community which is why I think it has staying power to come up next year. But it obviously didn't get a vote in the last couple days of session. I'm wondering if maybe it is a little too lightning rod to come back, but I'm not sure.
It died in the Senate committee, correct?
Yes.
Which committee? Do you remember?
I'm going to take a guess and say that would be Judiciary, but I don't know.
Okay. Because I was just saying, the chairman of that committee
Matters a lot.
Would be the one where the conversation needs to be focused on. Is this somebody who can be convinced to bring back this bill, even in a lesser form?
Sure.
And we spoke about this at great length on a previous session, and I still think there's a fair number of people in this country, especially on the conservative side of things, that have a real issue with adding additional penalties due to what the alleged criminal is thinking while he's committing the crime.
Mm-hmm. And this is my optimism getting in the way of my realism, but it would be really great if I saw that conversation at some point in the Senate. This is part of the idea I think people have of the legislature of, this is a really fascinating topic to me, like you just laid out there. And I enjoyed watching the debate back and forth on it in the House. I thought it was one of the more substantial bits of debate where people were bringing up really great points. I would have loved to see that in the Senate and then at least seen a vote. Because I think it's tricky, especially like trying to play crystal ball here, seeing what kind of chances it has when we didn't see it come up. And right. That is, disappointing, but I understand it, I guess.
Councilman?
I don't see it coming back, frankly, because I don't think that there are a bunch of Republican legislators that want to necessarily have this conversation on the back of a heartbeat bill and have two issues that are polarizing one way or the other and there's not a lot of gray area.
In an election year. Which, always have to mention.
I always look at things politically.
No, that's why we're here. That's the way to do it.
It'll come back, but it's not going to see it.
I'm all in favor of giving district attorneys and the like more weapons in their arsenal when negotiating plea deals with criminals or alleged criminals. So if this was something that they could throw on there and say, hey, kind of like the death penalty. I'll take the death penalty off if you plead guilty. Look, I'll take this hate crime off if you do this, this, and this. Maybe if they made the argument that way and the district attorneys got involved and said, hey, this is something that we can use, that might soften it.
And I don't know if this is being younger or I don't know why I feel that way, but I feel like crime is obviously not good in general. Let's just all agree that let's agree that on the politics podcast.
Whoa, hold on there, Ben. That's a hot take.
Crime is
crime
bad.
Might be bad.
But if you are literally persecuting somebody based on their race or gender or who they choose to go to bed with or how they identify themselves, something is obviously more wrong with that individual who committing that crime than would just be committing a crime. And so do I feel like there should be harsher penalties for it? Absolutely.
Well, and my argument for that is we already have a classification of terrorism when somebody makes an act that no longer is defined just by that act, but as a statement against a political state, a political party, a structure. So like
you lose me there.
No, but we are now legislating what someone has in their mind when we distinguish between that's somebody who attacked somebody and that's somebody who attacked somebody to send a message or to instill fear in a community. I don't see a huge distinction between those two things.
Well, we do already sort of classify different levels of evil, if I will, in the sense that we have laws on the books that if you shoot a cop, you're going to jail longer than if somebody shoots me.
Sure.
That's a more heinous crime. So the precedent has already been set that there are more degrees of evil. So I've always thought that was sort of the best argument for hate crimes, because it's not like this is a completely new issue. Mm-hmm. I just don't think people have gotten to the point yet where they think that a crime is a crime. It doesn't matter what you're saying or what you're doing as you're doing it.
Mm-hmm. I hope we see a discussion on it next year, whether it passes or not. I still think it would be great to talk about, but everyone's point stands of why that might not happen. Finally, private school vouchers. So this was passed by the
Love 'em.
Senate and never came up in the House. You know, I don't want to take us too far in the past here, but a lot of the election for governor in 2018 was ran on public education from the Democrat side. Stacey wanted to be the public education candidate. Now we can argue whether or not that's true, but there's certainly an idea that the first thing Brian Kemp does when he gets into office is he raises teacher pay. And it is almost a way of let's just put that behind us. I'm going to do a big chunk. This is the largest raise Georgia teachers will have gotten, I think, ever.
He learns from Roy Barnes. That's my immediate reaction.
Well, but let's talk about school vouchers. Is there going to be support for that next year? Like you said, we'll go into an election year. It's a bit lightning rod. It's something people are very entrenched on and care very much about. Is it going to come up again, or are we going to try and have another issue that supports, maybe those suburban legislators who are targeted right now?
I think it's a 2-year conversation. I don't think it's a next year conversation because it's hard to take bullets all the time, especially when you're about to go qualify and run for re-election. So I see it more as a 2-year conversation. And that being said, just from a political standpoint, Democrats love the opportunity to say that Republicans don't like teachers. They love it. And so if you take money out of the system, it's a great way to do that, regardless of the merits of vouchers and paying for private school and being able to subsidize your tax dollars paying for private school, right, wrong, or indifferent. It will be viewed as taking money away from public school teachers and little Johnny in the pre-K program that wouldn't have had any other way to get there. And
the postcards write themselves.
And I recognize that, but that being said, there's a public education conversation that goes on in every county, in the municipalities with school boards. I don't know that it's not, if it's okay to have the conversation in public to see where people stand on LGBTQA plus conversations, it's fine to have that conversation in public. I don't mind knowing where my folks stand. They may mind me knowing, but
Wasn't there also a private school element to this? Because when we spoke about this a couple of weeks ago, we spoke about private schools. There was an ability for those whose kids are in private school be able to get part of a tax credit or something like that.
I don't remember that. That was your other podcast that you did.
It might have been. It might have been. No, I remember that because I remember thinking that. I mean, there are a number of new Fulton Democrats who have a lot of private school parents in their district, and if the vote or the angle is taken that this is perceived as a hit against private schools kids, that could be an issue in the fall.
That will be interesting because if you live in Atlanta, which is largely
Now,
bluer, and you have children, and you are a $200,000 a year income family, I can almost guarantee you your kids do not go to public school. So it's really interesting in the same way that MARTA was really interesting to watch the Democrats in Gwinnett County kind of get behind the no vote
Well,
in the same way.
and it's not. I mean, you're talking about a family in Buckhead, but I mean, it's everywhere. Betsy Holland would have to worry about that. The Democrat who's running against Debbie Silcox would have to worry about that. McLaurin would have to worry about it. There's a lot of private school kids up in that part of Sandy Springs, and same thing in Johns Creek and Roswell. So if the issue takes that turn, that would be an entertaining to see how they work that line.
And you try and negate that with the argument, and I'll be the first one to say that this argument is very difficult to make on a 6x7 mailer. But you make that argument by saying a better funded and better working public education system is better for everyone, whether you use it or not, in the same way you drive on a public road to get to your work. So that's a hard argument to make, but that, I think, if the conversation does take that turn, that's what I could see being the counterplay.
And just from a political standpoint, if you live in North Fulton, by and large, I think we all agree that they have great schools, and the vast majority of people send their children to public school. You're going to see people up here vote no, and you're going to see some Democrats vote yes. because their constituents send their children to private schools, whereas I can afford to send my kids to private school. They're going to go to Alpharetta Elementary School because it's a great small school with small class sizes, and it's a wonderful. Do I want to take money away from little Charlie? No. So it's really interesting. I think when you look, it's always funny, like in a NASCAR race, to see where people team in a line and who chooses to. Your friends are where you find them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
and you can make that argument on a 11x17, not a 6x7.
No, okay.
It's
I just need the tiny bit more room.
It's an issue that has different facets to it.
Sure.
That was the point.
And different ways to pitch.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. Okay, moving on to our second topic. Elections and people announcing for them. This is my favorite now. I'm so happy that we have 18 months until 2020 and we're already 6 months into that election cycle. So let's start with Senate. Former mayor of Columbus, Teresa Tomlinson, announced her bid for Senate this week in a way that I do not envy, which is she established the exploratory committee, which means she can raise money and she can spend money. But she does it basically on the caveat, and I don't know if this is her exact words, basically on the caveat that if Stacey Abrams jumps into the race, she's going to get out. I do not envy that position. She feels like she has to start fundraising and finding ways to make money and spending money, as most people running for Senate at this point do. And Stacey has not made a decision yet and put her in an awkward situation. So out of the several Democrats that could run for that seat, if Stacey is to not, she is the first one to officially start her committee up.
Is this just the angle I would ask this question is this just a way to tell Stacey, hey, make your freaking decision? We're getting tired?
She might not be doing that intentionally, but
oh, BS.
You know, the AJC came out with approval rating numbers recently.
Yeah.
Stacey Abrams has gone down.
Absolutely. I'm sick of her.
And, well, you were always sick of her, Ben. That's not quite fair.
Well, I mean, I don't know if we want to go down that road because that's 5 minutes of and of itself about the value of whining in terms of an elected official.
Well, I think with the Democrats, it's not I don't know that it's the whining part, but I'm going to speak very personally here as taking my host hat off.
Uh-oh.
You know, I think with Stacey Abrams running against David Perdue, I think personally that that's a 50-50 race. I think it's going to be wildly close. I think with anyone not Stacey running against David Perdue, there is a large uphill climb to get to that point. And I don't know that you ever get to a point where, you know, it looks 50-50 before Election Day. To forego the best chance in this state for the state party to pick up a Senate seat, to run for president in a field that is nearly 20, I think has seen her approval ratings go down. And this idea that she doesn't have to make a finite decision until September, I have seen, you know, the data, I've seen the numbers, and I've seen what you need to fundraise. If you were going to run for president, you cannot wait until September. That's just not possible.
There were crosstabs to that poll, which I did not look at. As her decrease, is the fact that she's underwater now due to a slippage in Democratic support, I'd be very surprised.
I don't know.
I presume it would be a slippage
it has
in
to be
independence.
At least in some way. But I don't know.
I don't. I mean, you're the Democrat here, so I'm not one to. I'm not one to speak on what Democratic primary voters think. I would be surprised if they have slipped yet for her. She's still riding a pretty decent PR wave here.
That she is. And listen, if she comes back and announces for Senate, then it'll take a week for all to be forgiven.
When I saw the headline, I just...
Oh, thank God she's back.
Exactly.
Where's she been?
Yeah. Exactly. When I saw the headline, I said, well, they're getting a little tired of her. They're basically telling Stacey, you know, blank or get off the pot. I mean, this isn't 1960 where you can wait until February of election year to declare. And this isn't 1942 where the value of the party is I think in a lot of ways Stacey looks somewhat, or Abrams, looks somewhat selfish in that regard if she keeps vacillating and keeps waiting and keeps prevaricating on the issue. Then she's starting to look selfish. She's putting herself above the party. And this is a personal perspective of mine. You should never put yourself above the party, whether or not you're the president of the United States, which ours has certainly done, in my opinion, or you're a city councilman. You're never bigger than the party. You're never bigger than the team. Every coach on the planet will tell you that.
Mm-hmm. Well, and you know, even if, let's just accept for a second that it is, you know, she's trying to find the best possible route for Stacey Abrams. And, you know, a lot of people couldn't fault her for that. I personally, I do think she could be president someday, but I do not think she could be president next year. I think if she goes into Senate and if she goes into a Senate campaign and manages to win in a southern state where she has, put forward this campaign of registering new voters and talking about these new ideas, and then she serves for a while in the Senate, I do think she has a bright future. I don't know that going now is the best possible way for her to get there. I think,
Who is her? I think it is I don't mean this with any disrespect to Senator Perdue, and I don't mean this with any disrespect to Governor Kemp. They are largely the same person who won a race the same way. And right, wrong, or indifferent, I just saw what happened when Brian Kemp ran a race against Stacey Abrams, and David Perdue has got way bigger pockets.
That's true. And bigger cojones.
And I don't know. This is not partisan. I would find out who is her Congress member.
Stacey Abrams?
Is it John Lewis?
Maybe John Lewis.
Yeah.
And that's a tall tree too. But I mean, you can't lose again or you're out. And that's the truth. Mm-hmm. And she's sitting there, as he made his pot reference, or get off the pot. Mm-hmm. Craig's not wrong.
I guess.
And she is awfully talented with an awfully broad appeal in a lot of ways to sit there and get this wrong, even if it means sitting out. John Ossoff isn't struggling for things to do.
Let me phrase,
and he should be, but
let me phrase it this
we'll
way.
Come back to that.
I don't want to fault her because it's difficult. Personal ambition, personal philosophy, it's difficult. When you're a candidate, it's difficult to see things as they are. So my question is, who is her Jody Powell? Who is her Karl Rove? Who is her Mark Hanna? Who is her advisor that needs to be telling her, you got to make a decision? Because I don't have a doctorate in history. I'm not a history professor, but I am pretty smart when it comes to presidential history. People who have a lot less name recognition than Stacey Abrams has decided over a weekend whether or not they're going to run for president. So I don't understand why this is taking months.
Do you think people are as frustrated with somebody like Joe Biden, who seems to be pretty indecisive about whether or not he's going to run?
No, and that's a great point.
Why is that? Is it just the wealth of experience
he can
afford
to because sometimes when you're the front runner, it pays to stay out of the race. Stacey Abrams is not a front runner. Her South Carolina numbers were impressive.
I was going to mention
when I saw that 7%, I texted a buddy of mine and I said, I think this means she's running for president. She's going to see that. The ambition's going to kick in again. I don't know who her Jody Powell is, but if that guy or woman is equally ambitious, they're going to jump in because they're going to see that.
And the other thing that I saw that too, and then I look back and think, Stacey Abrams isn't going to win South Carolina. So you have to win primaries in states where you can win the general as well. So you have to have some sort of popularity. If Stacey Abrams is running for president, she's probably not going to win the state of Georgia.
I don't know about that.
Ooh, that's a tough one.
I don't know about that. I mean, part of her.
Yeah, against the Donald, you're right.
Well,
against Ronald or against George W. Bush, she would lose.
I think it depends on Cory Booker. I mean, not to simplify it too much. I don't know how national you want to get here. But half of the South Carolina Democratic primary vote is African American. More than half of the Democratic primary vote in Georgia is African American. Mm-hmm. Alabama, Mississippi. I don't know what it is in North Carolina. It's probably a little bit lower. Virginia is awfully high. Mm-hmm. If she comes forward, I know Kamala Harris is out there as well, but if she comes forward and sort of represents herself as the African-American candidate, is she going to win the Wisconsin primary or New Hampshire primary? No, but she can make a pretty good case below the Mason-Dixon line on that.
Which, to Ben's point, most of those states aren't really in play anyways. You get to a general election.
I don't think Abrams has a better shot of winning Georgia than any other candidate in November. Mm-hmm. I think she wins the Georgia Democratic primary, but not in November. Her presence doesn't add one bit to that generic blue boilerplate vote.
And it'd be really helpful to have her running for Senate to help whoever got that presidential bid. I guess that's just me thinking. But I mean, I asked the Biden question because,
Well, you saw what happened with him, and this is off the subject, but when you go to Real Clear Politics and you start looking at polling results, man, when they saw him wide open at the top of those polls, they sure did start, oh, he's hugged on me for 27 years, and I'm sure that's coming from...
He can afford to wait.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, yeah, I don't know. And maybe the next couple polls, if Stacey starts registering some numbers, maybe we'll see.
Well, they have to put her in the poll.
Right. This is part of the challenge.
I know it's a public poll. Stacey, with all of her money flowing into whatever that group is that she has now, may be doing her own private polling.
It'd be Fair Fight Georgia.
Sure.
Or Fair Count Georgia, both of them.
Whatever they call it.
It's
They might be doing.
what they call it.
They might be doing private polling, and where it's listed, but in a public poll, which is what will attract donors and attract attention, they actually have to put her name on the line.
I ask the difference between Stacey Abrams and Joe Biden, and I think part of the difference for me and why Stacey Abrams, I think personally, is a little more frustrating is because Joe Biden has not publicly said he can afford to wait until the fall. That is quite a statement. Biden at one point said, April and May.
Balls on that guy are just enormous.
Well, I mean, it's not the public that should be upset. It's the people like yourself, the political class on the Democratic side. I mean, all the hundreds and thousands of people who owe Joe Biden their life and their career, who now are sitting and can't do anything in the presidential race until he makes a decision. They're the ones who should be upset, not Joe Democratic primary.
But to that point, then do the voters even really care when she gets into the race if she gets in time?
I'm talking about Democrats would be ticked off.
He's scary because he takes people like Mike Kennedy and myself who are not necessarily wild fans of the president and think, I know he's not insane.
I could do a Joe Biden.
You know what I mean?
Presidency.
And that's
sure.
That's
a powerful thing.
With economies of scale, it's very powerful.
All right. Well, we're getting off topic, but let's run through a couple more candidates, and we don't even have to spend too much time on it. But other potential candidates for Senate if Stacey does announce a presidential bid. We already mentioned Teresa Tomlinson. Mayor of Columbus has been making a couple TV rounds locally. Certainly doesn't have the name recognition that Stacey Abrams has. I mean, I think it's fair to say no Democrat in the state has that level of recognition. But in my mind, one of the best candidates the Democrats could put forward for that seat. Also, like you mentioned, John Ossoff, who lost a race for District 6 against Karen Handel. Now it would be 2017. So 2 years ago. Is that
Almost,
right?
Yep.
Yeah, okay. And Sarah Riggs-Amico, the lieutenant governor candidate that ran on the ticket with Stacey Abrams, has also been thrown around. A local businesswoman who could bring out the female vote. I mentioned this on a couple episodes ago. It's tier 1 and tier 2, and there's only one person in tier 1, and there's probably 5 in tier 2.
Jen
Jordan on your.
I do have Jen Jordan on the sheet. I don't know how likely that is, but I've heard her name being thrown around.
I think
as well.
she's a superstar, and I don't necessarily. I think she's too smart because she knows she'd lose. That's the thing about when you get to those folks are incredibly self-aware. When you're somebody like her, and she's really smart and she's really articulate, and I think if she ever decided she wanted to be a just kind of moderate Democrat, she would just mop up.
And has received some national recognition for her
not on
speech
accident.
on House Bill 481, which is the heartbeat bill. Yeah.
There also needs to be a reminder that the Democrats are going to need a large number of candidates in 22. I mean, we sometimes forget for obvious reasons, but the Democrats did lose every statewide race last year. So they're going to need a candidate.
I don't forget that very often.
They're going to need a candidate for insurance. They're going to need a candidate for SOS and for ag and for labor. And the party bosses, assuming there are any, will get in a room and say, well, who are we going to get to run for these things? And they're going to look at all these new Democrats who have won races in the suburbs.
I wouldn't waste her.
And
I wouldn't.
I'm running
her.
for LG in 22.
No, I'm saying I wouldn't waste her for the U.S. Senate. I would save her. Oh, I think she would make. I like Jeff Duncan a lot. I think she would be really hard to beat.
Formidable. Okay, before we close, let's talk about District 6. Karen Handel, the former holder of the seat, came out with an announcement a couple weeks ago to a large number of endorsements, including most of her former colleagues in the House of Representatives and the former holder of the seat, Tom Price. She will run against Brandon Beach in that primary against Lucy McBath for District 6. We've talked about this matchup a little bit. Now it's solidified. Her fundraising with that announcement and the quality of that announcement is going to be pretty hefty. How's the Republican primary looking for District 6?
I would think the better way of phrasing would be is that Brandon Beach is going to be running against Karen Handel instead of the other way around. I mean, it's pretty common that when an incumbent loses, and if that person decides to run again, if that incumbent has not messed up. And say what you will about Karen Handel, I don't think she messed up either in the campaign.
There wasn't like a scandal or anything.
No scandal, no bad vote. There was no legislative mess up, nothing that she did on Capitol Hill. So it's pretty common that the Washington guys and the local guys will rally around that incumbent for a rematch.
Sure.
So I'm not surprised by any of the endorsements, and I think she'd be a great candidate in the fall.
What are the chances to take back the seat? Have enough things changed in the past couple years? I mean, the margin was so
It was very
thin.
close.
Yeah.
I don't see it.
You don't see taking it back.
I'm pretty open about who and what I choose to champion and support. I'm a loyal friend to Brandon. I'll contribute to his campaign. I respect him immensely. I do anything he asks me to do. But there's a guy running for re-election in the U.S. presidency that is just not that popular in North Fulton.
Mm-hmm.
And you have to know, I said this with respect to, and Craig will know this too, but when David Belle, the mayor of Alpharetta, chose to run for Secretary of State, it was like he didn't account for the fact that he was running against a guy who was willing to spend $2 million of his own money. Like, that's a big-ass oversight. And so what do you how is Lucy McBath going to have a less favorable playing field in 18 months than she had a few months ago? That being said, listen, I'll go down with the ship. Not necessarily party wide. I'm not as big of a team guy as my counterpart over here, but I think it's gonna be tough.
Yeah, I think the question you asked there is the magic question, and it's hard to find a way where it's more favorable to Republicans than it is Democrats come presidential year.
The burden is on McBath in the sense that if she messes up, she now has a voting record. When she was able to run last year, she could say anything she wanted. She didn't have a record about anything. Now she'll actually have a voting record. So there is an opportunity there.
It's almost like the incumbency advantage is no longer an advantage anymore.
Well, to a point.
Sure.
The incumbency advantage now is a money thing. Because people, it's not like 1957. People aren't used to voting for people. That doesn't occur anymore.
You can fundraise on votes you take as the Democratic majority, too. Yeah. So bills that are passing the House, maybe they're not getting taken up in the Senate, which is Republican controlled, but she can send out an email saying, I supported this today. It passed through. And that's, very powerful.
And it would be probably easier to, no, I take that back. I was going to say that. There will be a vote or two that will be questionable, as there always is. And it's just a question of how palpable it is.
And I think we all agree that for the next 18 months, there's going to be very little that gets done in Washington because one chamber is going to do what they can to make the other chamber look foolish. And that's kind of sad, but it's also the game that we all choose to play. And at the same time, and I'd say this, if I were Brandon, I would take 4 or 5 days worth of endorsements of Karen Handel, which is no secret that that's what happened. And I wouldn't go seek one single endorsement. I'd run as the outsider. I'd raise money like crazy, and I'd tell a better story.
You gotta go to one side or the other. Getting stuck in the middle.
And I think getting 18 pages worth of endorsements, man, does that make you vote? No. Tell a better story. Yeah, Mail 11 by 17.
Instead of 6 by 7. All right, let's close it out with what we are watching for in the news this next week. I will start because I can't remember if Ben knows that we do this closing segment. with all the talk of 2020 coming up in 18 months, something like that, we've got a lot of municipal elections in 19. I hate to put my hometown kind of on the spot here, but I don't have a great understanding of why Sandy Springs does all of their municipal elections at the same time. It kind of blows my mind that you would have no continuity over a set of terms, but that's okay. I'm looking forward to races all throughout.
This is what you worry about. Why Sandy Springs isn't staggered?
It's just confusing to me, and it just seemed like when they made the city, it was short-sighted to have 6 city council members and the mayor all elected at the same time.
Personalities write charters. That's the question: is why did Sandy Springs do it this way? Because the person who wrote the charter preferred that.
Well, and because,
don't overcomplicate it.
No, I get that, but I'm not asking. I guess I'm not asking why it's that way. I'm expressing my frustration because it causes lots of problems. But
I thought you were maybe because as a political consultant, it just makes fewer the number of races out there.
No, come 2021, there will be 7 races in my hometown, and I will be there.
So. I thought you lived in Roswell.
No, I grew up in Sandy Springs.
Yeah, I thought you lived in Roswell.
Myself and Representative Deborah Silcox went to the same high school. But anyways, moving on. Craig, what you got for us?
Oh, are we not talking about...
No, I'm done with municipals. Yeah.
Oh, okay. That was quick. What am I looking forward to? Well, I guess within the next 2 weeks, we Republicans, we do have a political convention on Saturday for the 6th Congressional District, where we will gather and come up with ways to defeat Congresswoman McBath.
Can I come?
It's open to the public. It's required by state party rules that all of our conventions are open to the public.
Do you promise to speak?
Yes. I will speak publicly. Yeah.
That's fine. That's fine. To know thy enemy. Also, the state convention is next month, state GOP convention, which will be good. Nationwide, I guess I just keep seeing how Biden keeps making people wait and wait and wait.
I think it's being a locally elected official in a largely Republican area, I am shocked at how the Georgia General Assembly went tooth and nail to take away as many avenues to protect local control as home rule as they did, especially from the party who, at least from a marketing slogan, champions local control and home rule. And so I've never been more disappointed with the delegation that represents Alpharetta than we have now. And I think they realize that there are folks in this community that are willing to fight them in the press over it.
This is why I like having Ben on. Him and Mike Kennedy
both throw a couple bombs at Chuck Martin here. Or is that the?
Well, it's. I wish we had you on for the SB 77, which is the monuments bill. I'd be fun to talk about.
Chuck also voted against the small cell bill. So if you take the good with the bad, like I do, I like to give people credit, and I know he listened to us, and I appreciate that.
I think we spoke every week about the idea that the Republicans are, the party of local control, and yet there are all these issues. I think I made the point a couple of weeks ago, basically saying that, for better or for worse, the idea of local control is now a strategy or is a truism that you ignore if your goal is something that isn't necessarily local control. So, if you believe, and both sides do that. If you believe that things would be better to regulate X, but local control stands in the way of X, it's like, well, in this particular case, X will be improved.
No, that was why my airport comment was consistent with my views.
Yeah.
Sure.
No, and the GMA spoke against, the Georgia Municipal Association spoke against the airport bill.
Evil GMA.
And I want to, some city. I don't understand some city councilmen who dislike the GMA.
You guys are going to have to debate that offline.
I don't know if you're one of them. I don't know if you're one of them or not.
We'll debate it offline. I take your point. It's I compare it to we'll have to come up with a word for it, but I compare it to the deficit, where it's great to run on and then hard to legislate with, or people don't like legislating with it. But anyways, that's going to do it for this week. This has been the Georgia Politics Podcast. Thank you to Craig and Ben for coming on. Be sure to follow us on Twitter at GAPoliticsPod. Subscribe to the show. We will not see everybody next week. Outside of legislative session, we are going to take on a new format. We will be coming to you every other Friday with the same format you hear now. And rather than talk in between those shows, just about what's going on in the news. We are going to try our absolute best, and we've got a couple lined up to bring you one-on-one interviews with legislators, lawmakers, city council people, mayors, people that influence the things that we talk about every week. We're going to get into why they wrote the law the way they did, why they voted, and we're going to see if we can, keep our philosophy of the show going through that format. So thank you all for subscribing. I hope you'll stick with us through that, and we will see everybody in 2 weeks.